In 2015, a young man living in Honduras made his way to the local cemetery and he found his wife's gravesite and he leaned up against it and he quietly began to cry. Seconds later, something would happen inside of that cemetery that would not only cause the young man to go silent, get up, and start running, but it would also be caught on camera. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to come to the zoo with you, and then cover them in honey and push them into the bear enclosure. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. In the spring of 2021, 52-year-old Texas resident Karen Davis got married, and then after the ceremony and after the honeymoon, she went through the process of changing her last name from Davis to McBride to match her husband's last name. After the change was done, the last step was to get a new driver's license with the new name on it. So Karen emailed the local DMV, or Department of Motor Vehicles, to set up a time for her to come in and make the change to her license. But after she sent that email, the local DMV immediately emailed Karen back, and they told her that they could not help her with this request until she resolved an issue. Now, they didn't specify what this issue was. However, they very cryptically said it had something to do with the state of Oklahoma. And then at the bottom of the email, there was just a phone number they told her she needed to call in order to resolve this issue. And so Karen's thinking, okay, that's pretty weird, but I did used to live in Oklahoma, so that probably has something to do with it. And so, not thinking much of it, she punched this number the DMV had given her into her phone, and then she let it ring. A few moments later, much to Karen's shock, a woman from the Norman, Oklahoma District Attorney's Office picked up the phone and said, "How can I help you?" Karen immediately assumed that the DMV must have made a mistake, that maybe they were trying to give Karen some other number in Oklahoma because this was an Oklahoma problem, and they had mistakenly given her the number to the DA's office. But since she had this woman on the phone, Karen told her, hey, I was just trying to get a new license in Texas. They told me there was some sort of issue. It had to do with me potentially living in Oklahoma. I don't know what it is, but this is the number they gave me. So I'm sure it's a mistake, but that's why I'm calling. The woman from the DA's office had no idea who Karen was, but after taking down Karen's information and looking on her computer, she discovered Karen's so-called Oklahoma problem. And after she explained to Karen what this enormous problem was, Karen literally couldn't believe it. But after this woman went over the details a few more times and really showed Karen that this Oklahoma problem was very, very real, suddenly everything in Karen's life made sense. For the last 22 years, Karen, who was incredibly smart and friendly and polite and never had a problem with anyone, had an incredibly hard time getting a job. Even jobs that she was extremely qualified for, she would get turned down for someone who was way less qualified. And then, in the rare times that Karen did actually get hired, she would always get fired for no reason. And so Karen never understood why she was being treated this way until now. It would turn out 22 years earlier, which is when Karen's hireability issues began, she lived in Norman, Oklahoma, which is where the DA's office was that she would end up calling 22 years later. And when she was living in Norman, she lived with a roommate. And this roommate was this nice young man who had a couple of young kids. And one weekend, he went to the local movie store called Movie Place, and he rented the hit 90s movie, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, to watch with his kids. And after he was done watching this movie, he didn't return the VHS tape of Sabrina the Teenage Witch back to Movie Place. Now, normally when this happened, the movie store would just hit the card holder with lots of late fees, which was actually great for the movie store. They made lots and lots of money on individual people that just forgot to return their movies. And if the cardholder just continued to hold on to this delinquent movie, at some point the movie store would just hit them with a final fee that basically accounted for the total cost of the VHS tape that they had effectively stolen. And then at that point, the matter was resolved. The cardholder owned the VHS tape, whether they knew it or not, and the movie store simply moved on. But in this case, Movie Place in Norman, Oklahoma didn't think that was enough. And when Sabrina the Teenage Witch was not returned in a timely fashion, they pressed charges against the cardholder. And the cardholder was Karen Davis. The roommate had just borrowed her card. And somehow, these charges against Karen were never brought up to Karen. She was never contacted by anyone. And so for 22 years, she was technically a wanted felon. Meaning every time one of her employers, either during the interview process or after she was hired, when they would run a criminal background check on her, it would pop up she was wanted for felony embezzlement. And so this was the reason she kept not getting jobs and kept getting fired from jobs. Since discovering these charges, Karen worked with the Norman, Oklahoma DA's office and got these charges dismissed. You know what really makes me want to slap the like button with a tasseled wobble gong? Inflation! Prices are going through the roof right now, which is why I'm excited to partner with Current again. So thank you to Current for sponsoring today's video. Also, stick around to the end of this sponsored segment because I'm going to be sharing the best like button gags you all sent me a couple of weeks ago on Current during our last cash giveaway. Current is the mobile banking app that, unlike boring old banks, they actually help you take control of your money, which is more crucial than ever right now. Old banks, just like the like button, they just charge you fees and slow you down. But with Current, there are no monthly fees, and the app is super easy to use. And while other banks earn you basically nothing on your savings, with Current, you can earn over 40 times the national average. Because of the strain inflation is having on all of us, Current and I are giving away $2,500 to you all. For a chance to win part of the $2,500 giveaway, all you have to do is click the link down below, download Current, and then use my code BALLEN250. And now here are the top 5 like button gags we received. My favorite was from Regina. Please invite the like button to the zoo with you, and then cover them in honey, and then accidentally push them into the bear enclosure. Okay, back to the stories. In the early evening hours of December 24th, 2011, so Christmas Eve, 26-year-old Zazel Preston sat on her bed in her little apartment in Anaheim, California, and wrapped Christmas gifts for her children. Laying next to her was her newest addition to the family, her third child, a 7-week-old little boy. This Christmas was a big deal for Zazel. It was also a big deal for her husband, 30-year-old William Wallace, not only because it was going to be the first Christmas with their new son, but also because this was the first Christmas after Zazel and William had reconciled their relationship. They had been married for the past 3 years, but over those 3 years, their relationship had been very unhealthy and toxic and at times abusive. But earlier that year, when Zazel had discovered that she was pregnant, this baby became kind of like a new anchor point for their relationship. It was like suddenly they could put their differences aside and just focus on raising their kids together. After wrapping her final present, Zazel hopped off the bed, she scooped up her little boy, and then she headed out into the living room where she met up with her husband and her 2 older children, who were little girls aged 3 and 8, and then they all headed outside and went next door to celebrate Christmas Eve at a party with their neighbors. Early the next morning, so on Christmas Day, Zazel's 2 oldest children, the 2 girls, they got up early and they rushed out of their bedrooms and they ran down the hallway into the living room where their parents were waiting for them on the couch along with their baby brother. The living room was completely decked out with Christmas decorations that the family had put up over the past couple of weeks. The Christmas tree was in the corner with bright multicolored lights and ornaments all over it. There were wreaths on the wall and other string lights around the top of the room. And then over their fireplace were all of their stockings nailed up, stuffed with goodies. The little girls squealed with delight and ran around the couch and took up spots right underneath the Christmas tree, and they grabbed their first present and they turned and looked at their parents on the couch, and they saw their dad kind of give them a nod of approval, which meant, okay, you can start opening your gifts. And so the girls happily began tearing into the festive wrapping, and then after each of them had their brand new toy in hand, they turned around reflexively to show their parents. And so William, he sees the toys and he says, oh, they're so great, guys. And then when the girls, they look at their mother and they show her the toys, she doesn't even react. She completely ignores them. And so at some point, these little kids, they start yelling for their mom, hey mom, check it out, look at this new toy. But Zazel just sits there. She doesn't say a word. She's just sitting back on the couch, completely ignoring them. Finally, the 8-year-old turns to William and says, "What's wrong with mommy?" And at this point, William pauses, and then he gives Zazelle a scathing look before very bluntly saying to these young kids, "Mommy got drunk, and now she's ruined Christmas." The girls knew from William's tone of voice that their parents must be fighting, and so they did what they normally did when this happened, and that was to just try to ignore it. And so the little girls, they turned away from their parents and began opening more presents, doing their best not to disturb their parents, who were sitting silently behind them. And then, a little after 9 a.m., after most of the presents had been opened, William abruptly stood up and walked into the other room and placed a phone call. And then, a few minutes later, there was a loud knock on the front door. The night before, after Zazelle and William and their kids had left their neighbor's party and come back to their apartment, Zazelle and William had gotten into a vicious fight. And by the time the kids had all gone to bed, the fight between the parents had become very physical. Neighbors would recall late at night on Christmas Eve hearing this very loud commotion coming from Zazelle and William's apartment. And at some point, apparently Zazelle had tried to run out of the apartment, but William had chased after her and hauled her back inside. The sounds coming from their apartment would eventually stop somewhere in the wee hours of Christmas Day. And then as the sun came up on Christmas Day, Zazelle and William had made their way to the couch, and they were sitting there with their 7-week-old baby, waiting for their 2 oldest to wake up and come open presents. Except when their 2 little girls came out of their bedrooms and bombed into the living room to begin celebrating, only William was alive. Zazelle had been beaten to death by William. And after he had beaten her to death the night before, he had dragged her into the living room, set her up on the couch to make it look like she was sitting, and then put sunglasses on her eyes in order to trick the children. And so all morning, as this 3-year-old and 8-year-old are opening these gifts and turning and showing their mother with excitement, she was dead the whole time. But at around 9 a.m., William realized his charade was not going to last because his kids were really keyed in to there being something wrong with their mother. And so that was when he got up and he called 911 and he told them that his wife had gotten drunk and fallen into a glass coffee table. And so she was hurt. And so a little bit later, the police and paramedics, they arrive, they go inside, and right away they can tell William is lying to them. There's more to this story than they're being told. And so ultimately, William would be convicted of second-degree murder, and he would be sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. As for Zazelle's 3 children, they are now being looked after by her parents. In August of 2015, 16-year-old Nacy Perez suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. As she lay there scanning around the dark, tiny room that she was in, it dawned on her that the most likely reason she had just woken up is because she really needed to use the bathroom. And so she climbed out of her bed and she began carefully walking across the room where her other relatives were sleeping on the floor as she moved towards the back of the house. Nacy lived in a town called La Entrada, which is located in one of the poorest and most dangerous countries in the world, Honduras. But despite the harshness of her reality, Nacy was pretty happy. She had recently married the boy she was in love with. His name was Rudy, and the 2 of them were both very excited about their first child, which was due in a matter of months. So Nacy reached the back of her house, she pushed open the back door, and she stepped out into the hot night air, and then she made the familiar walk across her backyard toward the outhouse. But Nacy would never reach the outhouse. The next morning, Nacy's mother woke up first. Her name was Maria, and as she passed by the back door, she looked outside and she saw Nacy lying on the ground. And so Maria, she screams, she runs outside to her daughter and she flips her over and she's looking at her, and Nacy is unresponsive and she's foaming at the mouth. Now, they're in a part of the world where healthcare was not top-notch, not even close. And Honduras is known for being an extremely religious part of the world. And so Maria did not think, oh, I should send my daughter to the hospital or I should call a doctor. Instead, Maria and the rest of Nacy's family, who had all streamed outside because of the commotion, they decided to call a priest to perform an exorcism because the belief was Nacy must be possessed with demons. And so a priest was hailed to the residence, and the priest would perform an exorcism on Nacy, but it wouldn't do anything. And so at that point, Maria and the rest of Nacy's family would take Nacy, who was still totally unresponsive and foaming, to the local hospital. But by that point, it was too late. Nacy was dead. When Nacy's family asked the doctors what happened to her, they said they didn't know. And so, heartbroken and confused, Maria and the rest of Nacy's family brought Nacy back home. They had an ad hoc memorial service, and then they buried her. The following day, Nacy's husband, Rudy, who was totally distraught because he has not only lost his wife, he's also lost his unborn child. He got up early and he just had to go to the cemetery to be with his wife. And so he made his way over to the local cemetery and he found his wife's gravesite. Nacy had not been buried under the earth. Instead, she had been placed into a coffin, and that coffin had been slid into this big hollowed out cement block that was as big as a coffin. And then once the coffin was slid inside, they walled up the opening. So basically her gravesite was this kind of freestanding big cement block. And so Rudy finds Nacy's cement block, and he goes up right next to it, and he leans up against it, and he begins to quietly sob. But just seconds later, he would hear something in that cemetery that would cause him to go completely silent, stand up, and sprint away. The day before, approximately 1 or 2 hours after Nacy's coffin was slid inside of that cement tomb and walled up, Nacy woke up. She was never dead. It's unclear what originally caused Nacy to collapse outside of her house on the way to the outhouse, but the two leading theories are, 1, she had a severe panic attack caused by a nearby gunshot, or 2, she had a severe episode of cataplexy. Cataplexy is the sudden, uncontrollable loss of muscle function, often brought on by very strong emotions. A mild case could be just having your knees buckle for a second. A severe case, which is what they believe could have happened to Nacy, would result in basically complete paralysis. But whatever the case was, the doctors at the hospital got it wrong. When Nacy was brought to them, she was not dead. And so when she woke up inside of her coffin that was encased in cement, she began shrieking and trying to pound up against the inside of these tight walls that were pressed up against her. And at some point, she even managed to force her hands up near her head, and she shattered the glass window that sat in her coffin that looked right down at her face. She broke the glass, but it didn't help her at all because, again, it's just cement on the other side. And so glass shards fell into her mouth and into her eyes. And so she stayed like that, screaming and trying to fight her way out for over 24 hours, trying to get anybody's attention, but nobody heard her. Until her husband, Rudy, he leaned up against her tomb and he put his ear right up against the cement and began to cry. And that's when he heard through the cement the sound of his wife calling out for help. Rudy instantly ran and got help, and he and his family came back, and they broke open the side of this tomb, and they pulled Nacy's coffin out, and even though she was now unresponsive, she had a faint heartbeat. And so they rushed her to the hospital, but by the time she got there, she really had died. Nacy had finally just run out of oxygen, likely within minutes of her husband finally hearing her screams. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please invite the like button to come to the zoo with you and then cover them in honey and push them into the bear enclosure. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss our weekly upload. We now have a podcast called the MrBallen Podcast that puts out brand new, never before heard podcast exclusive stories on Monday mornings. And then on Thursdays, we put out the remastered audio from our best YouTube videos. Again, it's called the MrBallen Podcast, and you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Google. Basically, anywhere you get podcasts, you can find this one. We also have 2 additional YouTube channels. One is called MrBallen Shorts, and the other is called MrBallen en Espanol. We post near daily content on our Snapchat and Facebook pages. Those are both just called MrBallen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform. My username on all accounts is @MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. We also have some really cool merchandise, so head on over to shopmrballen.com to have a look. And if you have a story suggestion suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. Late at night on August 15th, 2019, two police officers in England were driving in an unmarked police car along this narrow, winding road when all of a sudden, right in front of them, another car came bombing down the road towards them. And so both cars came to a screeching stop, and then one occupant from this other car got out of their vehicle, and one of the officers got out of their vehicle. What happened next was so horrific that a special law was passed to make sure it never happened again. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please remove the prong in all of the like buttons belts. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On July 18th, 2019, 28-year-old Andrew Harper scrawled a little note inside of a card, and then he folded the card up, he slipped it into its envelope, and he handed that envelope off to a nearby friend. And this friend, after getting this envelope and Andrew's directions for what to do with it, he left Andrew's room and began walking down the hall all the way towards the other side of the Ardington house. The Ardington house, where they were staying, is this beautiful mansion built in the 1700s that sits on about 30 acres of gardens and parklands, and it's located about an hour west of London in the English countryside. Once Andrew's friend, with this letter in hand, had walked all the way across the mansion and had found the room he was looking for, he gently knocked on the door, and then after being led inside, he made his way right over to 28-year-old Lissy Beckett, and he handed her the envelope. Lissy and Andrew had grown up in the same town of Wallingford, which is a small rural town about 10 miles away from where they were, the Ardington house. And from the time Lissy and Andrew had met each other when they were 15 years old, they had become totally inseparable. It was truly love at first sight. And now, 13 years later, they were finally getting married. And so Lissy, after getting this envelope, she saw the writing on the outside of it and knew it was from her fiancé. And so she smiled, she opens up this letter, and she reads what's inside. And it just said, "Life is slippery. Here, take my hand." While on the surface, this little note seemed like nothing more than a romantic gesture from Andrew, in reality, those 7 words contained in that card were a great representation of who Andrew really was. He was a protector. Ever since Lissy could remember, Andrew had always been so concerned with her safety. And for that matter, anybody around Andrew was just worried about and wanted to make sure everybody was taken care of. And as Andrew got older and grew to be this massive 6'5" tall man, his natural inclination to protect other people only became more pronounced. While Andrew was known for being incredibly charming and friendly and approachable, at a moment's notice, he could flip the switch and literally step in and use his big frame to protect anybody that needed protecting, no questions asked. And so it came as no shock to Lissy, or really anybody who knew Andrew, when Andrew, at the age of 19, became a special constable or volunteer police officer for the Thames Valley Police Department. This police department was the same one that oversaw Wallingford, where he and Lissy had grown up, and also the surrounding areas. And just a year after becoming a special constable, Andrew had done such an amazing job that he was hired on by the Thames Valley Police Department to be a regular constable, so a full-fledged police officer. And over the following years that he was a regular constable, Andrew's hard work and dedication would quickly make him one of the most well-respected and well-liked police officers on the force. In fact, just a few weeks before he sent off that letter to Lissy on the day of their wedding, Andrew had been promoted. He had been assigned to the road policing unit within the Thames Valley Police Department, and what that meant was, in addition to a host of new responsibilities on a day-to-day basis, Andrew would now become one of the police officers who would immediately respond to any emergency call that came in. He was basically a front lines police officer now. And so, of course, this meant Andrew's job just became a lot more dangerous. But for Andrew, that didn't matter at all, because to him, the most important thing was protecting people in need. And so this promotion just gave him a bigger opportunity to do that. And so Lissy, after reading this little note that Andrew had just sent her, she set it down on the table, and now with a big grin on her face, she finished getting ready. And then that afternoon, she and Andrew would walk down the aisle, and they would say, "I do," in front of their families and their closest friends. And then that evening, after the newlyweds had had their first dance as a married couple, they would tell each other that this was the happiest day of their lives. 28 days later, on August 15th, Andrew, along with his partner, who also was named Andrew, his name was Andrew Shaw, they were conducting a surveillance operation in a town called Reading. Reading is a town about 30 minutes south of Wallingford. Just after 11 p.m., the men finally decided it was time to shut down their operation and head back home. Their shift had actually ended 4 hours earlier, but being hardworking and diligent police officers, they had worked overtime because they knew it would help their unit. But now at 11 p.m., they were totally exhausted, and so as they're kind of yawning and packing up their things, Shaw, who was driving, would fire up the engine of the unmarked BMW car they were in, and then once it was on, he would pull away from the curb, and they would start heading north. At the same time, a very distressed man who lived not far from where Andrew and Shaw had just been doing surveillance, he called 999, and he told the dispatcher that just a few moments ago, this gray sedan had pulled up his driveway and stopped right outside of his property. Now, this man's property was off of a road called Admore Lane, which was this winding one-lane country road that had very little traffic, and there was not that many properties off of it. And so for anybody to pull on to this man's property would have caught his attention, let alone a car pulling onto his property in the middle of the night. And so as soon as the man had seen these headlights coming up his driveway, he had gone to the window and watched, wondering, what is this person doing? Had they turned onto the wrong property? Are they going to turn around and leave? But to his horror, once this car had stopped right outside of his house, 3 masked men who were carrying weapons of some kind got out of the vehicle. And so at that point, the man had frantically dialed 999, and as he's trying to describe the situation to the dispatcher, he suddenly tells the dispatcher, as he's looking out the window, that he thinks these men are here to steal his quad bike. His quad bike was parked right outside of his detached garage, and he saw them walking towards it. And so he tells the dispatcher, who's already told him that police are on the way, he tells the dispatcher, "I can't wait any longer. I'm going out to confront them and stop them from stealing my bike." The dispatcher yells at him not to and says, "They have weapons, stay in your house." But this guy's not listening. And so he runs to his front door. He opens the front door up. But by the time he's looking outside, the gray car, the 3 masked men, they're all gone. And so too is his quad bike. And so he goes back in the house, he's talking to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher says, "Look, just stay at your house. The police are on the way. They will intercept that car. They'll get your quad bike back." And so seconds later, a call went out over the radio to Thames Valley Police to go and intercept this gray car on Admore Lane. So whoever was closest, go over there. But be advised, the occupants of this car are 3 masked men that are armed and dangerous. Now, Andrew and Shaw, when they heard this call, they would have known that they were not the only officers that could have taken this call. And they also would have known that they've been off the clock now for like 4.5 hours. There was no expectation that they would continue to work and go take this call. But they didn't care at all. When that call came across, the only thing they thought about was, do your job. And so Shaw, he whips the car around and he speeds towards Admore Lane, and he pulls off of the main road called the A4. He gets onto Admore Lane and he starts driving north. Now, as soon as they turned onto that road, their vehicle effectively blocked the way for anybody coming the other direction. And so at this point, they're expecting this gray car full of these masked men to be coming in their direction, and they are now blocking the way. And so Andrew and Shaw, as soon as they get on that road, they know a close quarters confrontation is almost guaranteed. But when you listen to the dashcam footage from the front of their vehicle that picked up the voices of Andrew and Shaw as they turn onto this road, there is no nerves, there's no fear, there's no hesitation. They are calm as can be. This is what they have trained for. They were ready. And so Shaw, he's making his way up this winding road. It's totally pitch black. The trees are practically on top of the road. It's like a tunnel of trees. And so they're driving along this road, and then all of a sudden, up in the distance, you can see on the dash cam footage, you see headlights bombing toward them. They're way off in the distance, and then all of a sudden, that car, these headlights, they come flooring out right in front of them, and both cars come to a screeching stop. You can hear the screeching of the brakes on the dash cam footage. And so this car in front of them comes to a full stop, and Shaw, he stops, but then he moves up just a little bit closer before fully stopping the car. And so now the two cars are only maybe 10 or 15 feet apart. At this point, it's important to understand that the vehicle that Shaw and Andrew were in was an unmarked car, and they had intentionally not put on their blue lights as they're cruising up this road because they didn't want the suspects to see the blue lights in the distance and turn around and get away. And so now they've come face to face, and so Andrew and Shaw, they're looking at this vehicle, and they can see that one, it's a gray sedan, so it matches the description of the car they're looking for, and two, behind this gray sedan is what looks like a quad bike that they are towing. And so they know this is the car they were looking for. It's on Admore Lane. This is gonna be it. And so Shaw, he flips on the blue lights, and Andrew, who's in the passenger seat, he opens the door and begins yelling at the occupants to stay where they are. But they don't listen, because now the masked men in the gray car, they know they've been caught. There's police right in front of them. And so suddenly, one of the masked men in the back seat of this car, he leaps out of the vehicle and he runs around to the back of the gray car and he unhooks the quad bike. And then the gray car, without even waiting for this third masked man to get back inside, it just begins driving forward on the left side of Shaw and Andrew, basically trying to drive around them, despite the fact there's nowhere to drive. It's a ditch on either side of the road. But obviously, these guys are desperate and willing to do anything to get away. And so this gray car has driven down into this ditch before Andrew and Shaw could do anything. And then the third masked man, who's realizing he's being left behind, he starts running around the right side of the police car. So he's trying to go around the other way. And amazingly, as soon as the third masked man made it around to the back of the police car, the gray car somehow managed to pop out of the ditch and got back onto the road, and it starts driving away from Shaw and Andrew. And as they're driving away, the third masked man is just on the road running after them. And so Andrew, seeing an opportunity to potentially grab this third masked man that was out on foot, he jumps out of the police car, he turns and starts running down the road after the suspects. And so Shaw, he doesn't have enough space on this road to turn around and drive after them. And so all he could do was put the car into reverse and then look over his shoulder and start driving in reverse after them. And so as Shaw is driving backwards down this road, he can see out of his rear window Andrew, who is chasing the third masked man, who is chasing the gray car. And so we can see all this happening out his back window. And then something totally strange that just defied logic happened. The third masked man suddenly leaps as if he's trying to jump into the moving car. And at the same time, Andrew, who's closed the distance on him, kind of lunges for the third masked man. And then just as suddenly as these two maneuvers have happened, both men just vanish, and then the gray car just drives away and disappears. And so Shaw, he's watching this happening and he has no idea what he's just witnessed. He's thinking, where did Andrew go? Where'd the third masked man go? What's happened? But he still can only drive in reverse. And so he's just driving and driving. And then finally, he reaches a point in the road that's just wide enough that he's able to turn the car around. And as he's doing that, you hear over dispatch that someone is asking Shaw, what's going on? Where are you? And all Shaw is able to say is, my partner, Andrew, has gotten out of the vehicle and I lost him. I don't know where he is. And so after Shaw has turned the vehicle around, he begins driving, now facing the proper direction. And as he's driving down this creepy dark road, you don't see anything. It's eerily quiet. Andrew's nowhere to be found. The car is nowhere to be found. The third masked man, there's no one. And so Shaw is just driving down the road, hoping that as he makes one turn or the next, he's gonna see his partner just kind of running on the road somewhere, but he doesn't. But as he's driving along, what Shaw didn't realize was that there were things in the road that belonged to Andrew. They were kind of small, so he didn't see them, but the footage would later reveal that it was almost like there was this trail of Andrew's things kind of littered all over the road. There was his wallet, then there was his badge, then there was his license and other ID cards, and then there was his glove, and then there was this piece of plastic that looked like it belonged on Andrew's vest. And then a little farther down the road, because Shaw is still driving and scanning for his partner and scanning for anything, and there's just nothing. As he's driving along, he would, in real time, notice something of Andrew's, and it was Andrew's stab vest that he wore over his chest. And so he stops the vehicle and he gets out, and again, he's on this totally pitch black road where it's weirdly quiet, and he's walking up and he grabs the vest, he comes back into his vehicle and he puts it down inside of his car. And at this point, over the radio, people are asking Shaw, what's going on? Where are you? And you hear in Shaw's voice a bit of panic as he's like, I've found Andrew's stab vest. It was on the side of the road. And he can't make sense of that. He has no idea why it's there. And dispatch, they don't know what to make of that. And so Shaw just continued driving down this road, thinking to himself, what's happening here? Meanwhile, less than a mile away at the end of Admore Lane, where it joined up with A4, which is where Andrew and Shaw had originally come in, two other Thames Valley police cars had arrived at that intersection. They had gone there specifically to try to intercept this gray car as they fled. And so they're sitting at this intersection and they're looking up Admore Lane and they see headlights bombing towards them. It's the gray car, and the gray car comes speeding out onto A4. It makes a hard turn and it speeds away from these two police cars. And so one of these two police cars that were waiting out on the A4, one of them takes off following the gray car. But the other police car, they stay right there because unbelievably, they had just spotted Andrew. It would turn out when Shaw first put the BMW into reverse and he began going in reverse towards his partner who was chasing the third masked man who was chasing the gray car, when he was doing that and he was watching out his back window and he saw the third masked man jump and then disappear and then Andrew disappeared, that was not a figment of his imagination. That really happened. The third masked man had attempted to jump into the moving vehicle and he had been successful. As for Andrew, why he suddenly vanished, the reason for that is truly horrific. The three masked men were 18-year-old Henry Long and 17-year-olds Albert Bowers and Jesse Cole. All three of them, prior to this night, had fairly extensive criminal records, and they proudly referred to themselves as career thieves, which basically just meant they spent all day and all night stealing from people. And so that night, they had gone out with the intention of stealing that man's quad bike. It's unclear how they knew he had a quad bike, but they definitely showed up prepared because they knew they would have to get onto his property and very quickly tow that bike out of there before the homeowner could stop them. And so they had attached this long, very thick rope to the back of their gray car. It was basically like this big loop of rope, almost like a lasso. And so when they pulled up onto that man's property, they backed up to the quad bike and they looped that stretch of rope over the handlebars of this quad bike. And then all three of them piled back into the gray car and they sped off with the quad bike in tow. But when they were on Admore Lane and came face to face with Andrew and Shaw and realized those are police officers and were caught, the third masked man, aka Jesse Cole, he hopped out of the gray car, he ran around to the back, and he unhooked the loop of rope from this quad bike, ditching the quad bike by the side of the road so that it would be easier for the gray car to make their getaway. And so once it was free, the gray car kind of took off without Jesse. And so Jesse ran around the cop car, but Jesse would get back up to the side of the gray car and he would leap into the window. And as soon as he was inside, and Henry, who was driving, he knew he was inside, so they're all good, Henry hit the gas. And who was standing with both feet inside of that loop of rope dangling off the back of the gray car when the gray car suddenly accelerated? Andrew Harper. Andrew was swept off of his feet as the rope grabbed onto his legs, and so his head came back and smashed into the ground, and then he was dragged for 91 seconds at an average speed of 42.5 miles per hour down Admore Lane. It was only after he had been dragged for over a mile, whipping violently side to side, smashing not only into the ground, but into trees and fence posts and shrubs, just getting destroyed on this road, that finally, when they pulled off of Admore Lane and got onto A4, that turn swung Andrew around and he smashed into a curb that dislodged him from the rope and sent him careening into traffic. At that point, one of those two police cars took off after the gray car in pursuit. But the other car, they saw Andrew as he was thrown off the back of the gray car and launched onto A4. Now, initially, they actually thought that the suspects were just hauling a dead deer behind them because it looked like a bloody deer carcass was dangling behind the car. But when they ran up to see what it was, they saw it was their colleague. It was Andrew. And so immediately they tried to save his life. But Andrew's injuries were catastrophic. He had been destroyed. And so Andrew Harper would die at 11:45 p.m. on the side of the A4, about 20 minutes after he and his partner had so selflessly agreed to go after this car despite the fact they didn't have to. The three killers were arrested about 1 hour after Andrew had died. A police helicopter had spotted their car parked amongst some buildings about 4 miles away from where Andrew was found. During their trial, the three teens would say they had no idea that Andrew was attached to that tow rope as they sped down Admore Lane. This is despite the fact that the prosecution, they went out and recreated the exact scene that played out on Admore Lane. They used the same car, they used the same tow rope, and they used a very lifelike dummy that was the same size as Andrew Harper. It was 6'5", 200 pounds, and they strapped it on the back of the car, and they drove the same mile stretch to see what it would be like to drive with Andrew attached to the back. And these experts that went through this recreation over and over and over again, they said the same thing. It was nearly impossible to drive the car because as soon as the dummy would start to shift one way or the other, it would tug and pull on this little gray car. And so handling this car would have been a nightmare, not to mention the fact that the sound of Andrew grinding against the cement and smashing into trees and posts would have been extremely loud. And so the prosecution attested that there was absolutely no way that those three teens wouldn't have known that there was a person connected to the back of their car. Also, the prosecution said that all along Admore Lane, they found blood on both sides of the road, high up into bushes and on trees, indicating that as Henry had driven along with Andrew behind him, he must have been swerving violently side to side, most likely, at least according to the prosecution, to try to dislodge the person that was stuck on the back of his car. But the three teens never changed their story. They also never once said they regretted what they did. They showed absolutely no remorse. And when the verdict was read, and these three teens were not found guilty of murder. They were found guilty of manslaughter, but everybody knew that was significantly better because the sentences were so much shorter. When that verdict came back, these three teens were punching the air and cheering and laughing, just making a complete spectacle out of it. And then after being led out of the courthouse with the devastated family of Andrew Harper basically watching them, they were smirking and smiling at the cameras and waving and just treating the whole thing like it was one big joke. Still to this day, none of them have apologized or expressed any regret or remorse about what happened. In fact, two of the killers, Jesse and Albert, they've come out publicly and said they're going to write a book about this crime, about killing Andrew Harper, and there's no indication that this book is being written because they feel bad. It's almost certainly being written because it's an opportunity to make money. Following the verdict, Andrew's wife, Lissy, who was totally devastated not only by the loss of her husband, but also by what she viewed as total injustice with regards to the fact that these three killers had not been convicted of murder, she would go on to lobby for years to pass a brand new law called Harper's Law that would give an automatic life sentence to any criminal that killed an emergency worker while they were committing a crime, meaning this law would not differentiate between whether it was manslaughter or murder. If you killed an emergency worker while committing a crime, you're going to jail for life. And this year, Harper's Law was passed. However, it will have no effect on the sentences of Andrew Harper's killers. Henry would be sentenced to 16 years in prison, and the other other two, Albert and Jesse, would be sentenced to 13 years in prison each. All three of them will be eligible for parole by the time they are 28 years old, which is the same age that Andrew was when they killed him. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please remove the prong from all of the like button's belts. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We now have a podcast just called MrBallen Podcast that puts out brand new, never before heard podcast exclusive stories on Monday mornings. On Thursday mornings, we put up remastered audio files from our most popular YouTube videos. Again, it's just called MrBallen Podcast, and you can find it on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Google, basically anywhere you find your podcasts, you can find this one. We also have two additional YouTube channels. One is called MrBallen Shorts, and the other is called MrBallen en Español. We also post near daily content on our Facebook and Snapchat pages. Those are just called MrBallen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username on all of them is just @MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. We have some really cool merchandise, so head on over to shopmrballen.com to have a look. And if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. On June 21st, 2018, an experienced outdoorsman packed up his two young kids and they headed out to this beautiful park in Southern California for a fun-filled summer weekend of hiking, camping, and adventure. Little did they know there was an evil presence lurking in that park. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, when the like button is at work, release a horde of angry emus into their house. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the morning of Sunday, June 17th, 2018, 35-year-old Tristan Baudet pulled his phone out of his pocket to check the weather forecast for Orange County, California. Orange County is this beautiful suburb located right between Los Angeles and San Diego. And this beautiful suburb is where Tristan and his wife, 36-year-old Erica Wu, and their two young daughters, aged 2 and 4, called home. And on this day, which was Father's Day, Tristan had gotten up early to check the weather to make sure it was going to be clear that day because he really wanted to take his family out for a fun beach day to celebrate his holiday. And he was in luck because when his app loaded, it showed that Orange County was going to be beautiful and clear all day. Although, even if the weather had come back as rainy and horrible and cold, Tristan was the kind of person who still would have wanted to go to the beach. Because for Tristan, anything outdoors was really awesome. That was his happy place, being out in nature. Whether it was going to the beach or going hiking or camping or just throwing a frisbee around outside, he didn't care. If he was outside, he was good with it. And even though his daughters were still very young, they both already had totally fallen in love with nature just like their dad had, which made Tristan just so happy because now he had these two little sidekicks that would go with him on all of his outdoor adventures. As for Tristan's wife, Erica, she did love the outdoors, but maybe not as much as Tristan did. But that was okay with Tristan because all he would do is make little adjustments to his adventures to make it more bearable for Erica. Like whenever they went camping, Tristan would totally rough it in a tent right on the ground, but he would bring along a big full-size blow-up mattress for his wife. And this was something that Erica just adored about Tristan. Not that he literally waited on her hand and foot, but rather that Tristan just kind of went with the flow. If his wife wanted a blow-up mattress, that was fine. You know, it didn't matter to him. That was just who he was. He didn't judge people. He was at peace with the world. And in fact, it was that character trait that had originally attracted Erica to Tristan. Erica had met Tristan back in high school when some mutual friends had set them up. Tristan didn't have a date to a dance at his school, and so so the friends were kind of like, Erica, go with him. And so Erica would agree to go. And on the night, she actually met Tristan for the first time. She's laying eyes on him for the first time. He was a sight to behold. The summer prior, he had sprouted up like 4 inches or so. So he's super tall, but his body hadn't quite filled out yet. So he's super lanky looking, and he was totally overdressed for this dance. He had on this full tuxedo, and he was not remotely self-conscious. He was only psyched to have a date to this dance. And during this dance, Tristan would just totally rock that tuxedo in all of his gangly glory, as if this tuxedo was made for him. And he would really try hard to make sure that Erica had a good time with him, and she totally did. And so after this dance was over, the pair was inseparable. Erica would go on to study at Stanford and would become an OBGYN doctor. As for Tristan, he would become this wildly successful, widely published scientist with a patent related to vaccine delivery. However, in typical Tristan fashion, he didn't care at all about his resume. It didn't matter that it was completely stacked. I mean, on paper, this guy was just unbelievable. But Tristan never changed his personality. He never changed anything about himself. In fact, his scientist colleagues, who adored him, they used to think it was hysterical that this brilliant chemist who was on the cutting edge of various cancer treatments and all this crazy research, that guy was actually this big mellow type person who wandered around the lab and started most of his sentences with, "Dude." By early afternoon on that Father's Day in 2018, Erica and Tristan and their 2 little girls had made their way to a local beach, and Erica had found herself sitting in a beach chair reading a book, and Tristan and the girls had set up a sunshade right down where the water broke, and they were digging in the sand. And so over the course of that afternoon, Erica, she's reading her book, and periodically she would look up and she would see Tristan and the girls digging in the sand or making sand castles. And then at some point, Tristan and the girls, they would get up and abandon their dig site, and they would run into the water, and then they would run back to shore right as the waves were breaking, trying to kind of escape the waves. And the 2 little girls thought this was so much fun, and they were laughing hysterically and screeching with excitement as the waves crashed at their ankles. These are tiny little waves. And at some point, Erica, she's looking up watching this, and she sees her 2 little girls having a blast, and she sees her husband flash her this big grin because he knows this is totally funny. And at that moment, Erica suddenly felt herself feel something that she didn't always feel these days. And that was just contentedness, happiness. Tristan, because he was this totally laid-back guy, he was able to just kind of enjoy life as it came to him. But Erica, she couldn't do that. She was a constant worrier, and that was largely because when she was just 8 years old, she lost her father. And it was this totally traumatic experience that really upset her childhood. It was just devastating for the family. And so ever since then, she had developed this very real paranoia that no matter how good her life was, that at any second it was going to be ruined by something horrible happening to her. But as she sat in this chair, watching her husband smiling at her and seeing her kids playing with him, it was just this perfect moment. And so Erica would put the book down and she would get up and run into the surf to be with her family. Little did she know, something horrible was about to happen. 4 days later, on June 21st, Erica was home studying for this big medical exam she was scheduled to take the next day. But at the house with her was her husband and her 2 little girls. And so the house was totally chaotic and loud, and it was obvious to Tristan as he looked over at his wife that she was really struggling to focus. And Tristan also knew that they were a week away from moving. They were moving to San Francisco. They had just put a deposit down on a house. They had some family up there, so it was a smart move to make. But they still had a lot to do for this move. And so Tristan's looking at his wife knowing that, the stress levels have got to be through the roof for her. And so Tristan decided he would just take the girls and head out for the weekend to make sure Erica had the time and space she needed to prepare for this test, and also just maybe to be alone and have some peace and quiet. And so Tristan made a couple of phone calls, and then after he was done, he talked to Erica and he told her that he had just made reservations at this campsite up in Malibu, California. Malibu is another beautiful Southern California town located about an hour and a half north of Orange County. It's where a lot of celebrities live. It's a very rich part of California. And he tells Erica that he had made reservations in this campground that's out there, and that he had called his brother-in-law named Scott, who had 2 young kids himself, ages 3 and 5, and they were all going to go there together and spend the weekend weekend at this campsite. Now, Erica was very thankful for her husband for being willing to do this because she did need the time and space to study, but she immediately was just concerned about it because, Tristan, he would take the girls and go out on all sorts of adventures all the time, but he had never gone camping overnight without her there, and so her reaction was to worry about it. But Tristan, who knew his wife very well, told her, "Don't worry, I will take great care of the kids. It's a place that's totally public. It's an amazing campground. There's loads of people around. It's totally safe." And so eventually Erica was convinced. And so Tristan began packing the car with all the camping supplies and the kids' toys and the kids' bikes. And as he's doing that, and the girls are really excited about this camping trip, Erica still found herself thinking, I hope they cancel this trip, because she just couldn't help feeling like something bad was about to happen to them. But Tristan did not cancel the trip, and after the car was all packed and the girls had been tucked into their car seats in the back seat, Tristan kissed Erica goodbye and said he would see her in a couple of days, and good luck on your test tomorrow. And with that, Tristan hopped into the car, he backed out of the driveway, and Erica watched as he pulled up the road and headed north towards Malibu. After studying well into the night, Erica finally went to sleep, and then the next morning she got up early because she was nervous about the test, she was anxious about her husband and her kids, and so she's up early and she's getting ready, and as she's getting ready, she hears a loud knock on the front door. She looks at her clock and she sees it's 6:45 in the morning, and there was no reason for anybody to be knocking on her door that early in the morning, maybe unless it was Tristan, but he wouldn't be knocking on the door, he'd just be coming inside. And so apprehensively, she walked out of her room and went to the front of the house, and then she opened the front door. And as soon as she saw who was standing there, she knew something was wrong. This video is sponsored by BetterHelp. Every day, I spend hours and hours poring over every little detail of one tragedy after the next to find my next topic. And then once I've settled on a topic, I often get so connected to the victim or victims in the story. I see my mom, I see my wife, I see my kids in these people, and it's just devastating by the time I'm actually done with the story. But telling these people's stories is very important to me. And so I knew if I was going to do this long term, I needed to prioritize my mental health. And so in 2020, I sought out a therapist on a highly reviewed online therapy platform called BetterHelp to try to help me handle the darkness of the type of content that I make. And I can tell you, I was not disappointed. BetterHelp offers licensed therapists that are trained to listen and help you. BetterHelp allows you to talk to your therapist in a private online environment at your convenience. All you have to do is fill out their questionnaire that helps assess your specific needs, and then within 48 hours, you're paired with your therapist. Then you simply schedule a secure video or phone session when you're ready. Plus, you can exchange unlimited messages with your therapist, and all of it is kept confidential. And at any time, if you want to change your therapist, it's easy to do so, and it comes at no cost. So if you're dealing with darkness in your life, I highly suggest BetterHelp. Join the 2 million plus who have taken charge of their mental health with an experienced BetterHelp therapist. That's BetterHelp.com. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/MrBallen. It's also linked below in the description. Erica would later reflect on this moment when she opened the door, and even though it didn't make sense and it was irrational, she would sometimes think to herself, what if I had just never opened the door? Would this nightmare have really happened? But Erica did open the door, and standing out there was her sister-in-law, Priscilla, who was there unannounced. She lived an hour and a half away, and she looked very frazzled and upset, and she would give Erica absolutely heartbreaking news. News that was so earth-shattering that Erica literally couldn't comprehend it. Like, this cannot be true. There literally has to be a mistake. But there was no mistake. Erica would not take her medical exam that day. Instead, she would hop into the car with Priscilla, and they would drive to Malibu. The day before, Tristan and his two little girls, after driving for about an hour and a half, arrived in Malibu at the entrance to the Malibu Creek State Park. Now, when most people think of Malibu, they just think of the beautiful properties lining the beach. They think of celebrities and rich people and exclusivity. And that's all true, But what a lot of people don't know about Malibu is that just outside of the kind of main Malibu area is this totally wild area, this very rugged terrain, all these canyons, all these heavily forested areas. It all kind of butts up against the outside of Malibu. And in this totally rugged area is where the Malibu Creek State Park is. So Tristan and Scott, they arrive at the gates of this park that leads into this wilderness, and they check in with the park rangers up front, and they are directed to their respective campsites that they had reserved. They had reserved 2 sites right next to each other. And all a campsite is usually is just a square little plot of land with nothing in it. And it's a place where you put your tent on, and sometimes there's a fire pit inside of it. It's really sparse. And so Tristan and Scott, they thank the park ranger. They drive all the way across the campgrounds. They get to their designated spots. And right away, Tristan's like, these are just not very good campsites. They were located right near the porta potties, so it kind of smelled bad, and there was lots of foot traffic right in front of their sites, and their site was kind of at a tilt too, so just overall it was not ideal. And so Tristan said this to Scott, and Scott decided he would just go talk to the park rangers again and see if they could change their campsites. And so he went to the front, talks to the park ranger, and they say, no problem, there's actually 2 open campsites on the other side of the park. We'll just swap your reservation. And so Tristan and Scott and the kids, they make their way to these other 2 campsites, and these are perfect. They're kind of tucked up at the base of this huge canyon. There are no porta potties nearby, so no foot traffic. It's very private, and the land was totally flat. And so the men are totally happy with this, and they start getting their stuff out of their vehicles and setting up their tents, and the kids are running around playing and riding their little bikes around. And then after their campsites were mostly set up, Scott and Tristan made a fire in the fire pit that was located roughly between where the 2 tents had been set up. And so Scott was sleeping with his 2 sons in his tent, and Tristan would be sleeping with his 2 girls in his tent. And so they get this big fire going, and then all the kids and the adults, they sit around the fire, and they start roasting hot dogs and making s'mores, which is marshmallow chocolate and graham cracker, and the dads are telling funny jokes and spooky stories too. And before long, the kids are just totally exhausted, and so Scott and Tristan both take their kids and put them to bed inside of their tents. And then after the kids are tucked in, the 2 men come back to the fire, and Tristan, who had packed pre-made cocktails, he pulls those out and he shares one with Scott. And then the 2 men just enjoyed each other's company, sat around the campfire, chatted for a while. It was mostly Tristan talking about his upcoming move to San Francisco, but Scott was happy to just listen. And then at some point, the 2 men were just totally exhausted, and they decided it was time for them to go to bed. And so they put out the fire. Scott would hug Tristan and tell him that he loved him, and then the 2 men would leave the campfire and go to their respective tents. As Scott climbed into his tent with his 2 sons, he turned and looked out the open flap of his tent across the fire pit towards Tristan's tent, and he saw Tristan climb into the tent with his girls. And so after he sees Tristan get into his tent, Scott zips up his own tent and he lies down, and within 10 or 15 minutes, Scott is fast asleep. Just before sunrise the next day, so around 4:45 a.m., Scott suddenly woke up. He thought he heard a loud sound, but he couldn't place the sound. And so he's just laying there. It's still dark outside. And as he's kind of getting his bearings, he realizes one of Tristan's daughters is crying in her tent. Now, this was not cause for alarm necessarily, because Scott just thought, whatever she was upset about, Tristan would certainly calm her down any minute and she'd be okay. But as Scott was laying there with his 2 sons sleeping right next to him, Tristan's daughter just continued to cry. Now, Tristan was a famously heavy sleeper, and so Scott was thinking, okay, he just must not be awake, and so that's why he's not able to comfort his daughter. And so Scott would carefully get up, he'd unzip his tent, he'd be careful not to step on his sons. He went outside, and outside it's cold, it's dark, he cannot see inside of Tristan's tent. There's no windows on it, and so he just walks over, and by the time he gets to the tent, he can hear clear as day Tristan's daughter is still crying. And so Scott kind of loudly but still whispering says, "Hey, Tristan, wake up." But Tristan doesn't wake up. And so with Tristan's daughter still crying right on the other side of the nylon of this tent, Scott decides to just open the tent up and look inside. And so he walks around to the front of the tent, he unzips the tent, and he looks inside. Now, it's too dark, he can't really tell what he's looking at, but even with the minimal light, he could tell that Tristan was clearly still sleeping right in the middle of the tent, and positioned on either side of him was his 2-year-old daughter and his 4-year-old daughter. And from the looks of it, the 2-year-old was crying, and the 4-year-old, who was also whimpering, was doing her best to comfort the 2-year-old. And so Scott's looking in, wondering what's going on, when the two little girls, they turn and look up at Scott. And when they see him, they just start saying, wet, wet, wet. Now, Scott doesn't know what they're talking about. He's starting to get a little bit flustered because he thinks something's wrong. And so he reaches in and just starts shaking Tristan, saying, hey, wake up. But as soon as he did that, he could tell Tristan's not sleeping. Tristan is dead, and his two little girls are sitting in a pool of his blood. Right before Scott had woken up, someone who was standing near the campsite had fired a gun several times, and one of their bullets went into Tristan's tent and struck him right in the head as he slept next to his daughters. Roughly 2 hours after Tristan was killed, Priscilla showed up on Tristan's doorstep to tell his wife, Erica, what happened, that her little girls were about to grow up without a father, just like she did. This news absolutely destroyed Erica. A 42-year-old man named Anthony Rauda would be arrested and charged with Tristan's murder. Rauda had a long criminal history, and at the time of Tristan's murder, he was living illegally in this park up in the canyon nearby, and when he was arrested, he was in possession of a gun that was ballistically linked to the bullet that killed Tristan. His trial is still ongoing because Rauda keeps firing his defense attorneys, which delays the trial. While Rauda has said he's innocent, he didn't do this, his behavior in court so far has not made him look any more innocent. He has been so violent and erratic during the initial court proceedings that when he goes into court, they have to strap his wrists and his legs into a chair and put what's called a spit hood over his head, which prevents him from spitting on people and biting people. Assuming he was the shooter, that he was responsible for shooting Tristan, which most people believe he was, and there really is an enormous amount of evidence that supports this, but again, his trial is still ongoing. But if we assume he was the shooter, the theory is it was completely random. He did not know Tristan. He basically just fired his gun either intentionally into the tent or recklessly, and he just happened to fire into the tent. But either way, one of his bullets struck Tristan in the head and killed him, meaning Tristan was literally just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And if this case wasn't heartbreaking enough, one more distressing detail is that this shooting was not the first shooting in or around this campground. In the year leading up to Tristan's death, there were an astounding 6 other shootings, 2 of which happened literally in the campground right where Tristan was killed. Now, none of these other shootings were fatal, but in all 6 cases, the shooter or shooters were never caught, and the Malibu police just kind of didn't investigate. It wasn't until Tristan got shot and killed in this campground that the stories of all these other shootings that never got solved came out, and people are looking on a map saying, wait a minute, there's all these shootings unsolved with a rogue shooter or shooters out and about right here, right over this campground, and we haven't shut down the campground, and we haven't told the public that there's potentially a uncaught shooter roaming around this campground? Why is that? Now, the answers to those questions we don't know now, but they will likely come out during Anthony Rauda's trial, where he's being charged not only with killing Tristan, but also for all of those other shootings. In the meantime, Erica has filed a $90 million lawsuit against several agencies, saying that her husband had no idea there was this threat of an uncaught shooter at that campground, and had authorities put any sort of warning up, Tristan never would have taken his kids inside of that park, and he would be alive today. Her lawsuit is still ongoing. After watching our videos, people often approach me and ask, how can I help victims and their families? Well, now we have a great answer for you. The MrBallen Foundation. The MrBallen Foundation is a registered 501c3 nonprofit that makes it as easy as possible for you to join me, my family, my team in supporting those whose lives have been most impacted by violent and heinous crime. We have already given $150,000 to victims and their families, including a $25,000 donation made in Tristan Baudet's name to the Experience Camps, which is a program for children who have lost a parent or both parents. Monthly donors to the MrBallen Foundation Honor Them Society receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. But the real reward is helping to create a new ending for victims of violent crime. Go to MrBallen.Foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. If you got something out of today's episode, remember we also have a podcast called the MrBallen Podcast that puts out weekly content, including brand new, never before heard stories that are podcast exclusives on Monday mornings. Again, it's just called the MrBallen Podcast, and you can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Google. Anywhere you find your podcasts, you can find this one. We also have 2 additional YouTube channels. One is called MrBallen Shorts, and the other is called MrBallen en Espanol. We put out near daily content on Facebook and Snapchat. Those channels are just called MrBallen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform. My username is MrBallen on all of them, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. We also have some really cool merchandise, so head on over to shopmrballen.com to have a look. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.